Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Mhm.
A lot of you have been asking about COVID-19 and how it's affecting children, especially when it comes to their neurological health. So today we're going to dig into some research that sheds light on those very concerns.
Sounds good. I'm ready to dive in.
Great. So we've got two main sources for this deep dive. First, we have a systematic review and meta-analysis that was published in Scientific Reports. And this study looked at a bunch of brain scans, neuroimaging they call it, of kids who had COVID-19.
Okay, makes sense.
And then our second source is a dissertation that focused specifically on the impact of COVID-19 on attention and working memory in school-aged kids.
Wow. So really getting into the nitty-gritty of how this virus might be affecting kids' ability to learn and focus.
Exactly. And that's really the mission of this deep dive.
Mhm.
We want to figure out what the short and long-term consequences of COVID-19 are for kids' brains and what those consequences mean for their well-being, their ability to learn, their overall development, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's crucial stuff. It's interesting because when COVID first hit, most of the attention was on the respiratory symptoms.
Right. Everyone was worried about the lungs.
Exactly. But now we're starting to understand that this virus can have a much broader impact. It's not just a respiratory illness. It can affect multiple systems in the body, including the nervous system. And that's true even for kids who had mild or even asymptomatic cases of COVID-19.
That's what's so scary about it. You think, oh, they had a mild case, they're fine. But this research suggests that might not always be the case.
Right, and that's why this research is so important. It's really shifting our understanding of the virus and its potential long-term effects.
Absolutely. One of the things that really jumped out at me from that meta-analysis was this statistic. They found that 43.74% of kids with COVID-19 who had neurological symptoms also had abnormal results on their brain scans.
Wow, that's almost half.
Yeah, it's a huge percentage. And it really underscores the point that we can't just ignore the potential neurological impact of COVID in kids, even if they seem to have recovered from the initial illness.
I completely agree. That's a really concerning finding. And it really makes you wonder what's going on in the brains of these kids who are showing these abnormalities.
And that's where we get to the next level of this research. They didn't just look at the percentage of kids with abnormal scans. They actually dug deeper to see what kinds of abnormalities were showing up.
Yeah, so let's break that down. What were some of the specific things they found?
Okay, so get ready for some technical terms. They categorized the abnormalities into a few different groups. So first you had what they called neurovascular findings, which basically means problems with the blood vessels in the brain. And this included things like strokes.
Okay, so that sounds pretty serious.
Strokes in kids are definitely a big deal. And they found that about 8.22% of the kids in this study had these types of neurovascular abnormalities.
Oh, wow, I had no idea strokes could even happen in children.
Yeah, it's not super common, but it can definitely happen. And it's something to be aware of, especially in the context of COVID-19.
For sure. So what were some of the other categories they found?
Okay, so another one was edema-like lesions. Have you ever heard of that?
I'm not sure I'm familiar with that term.
Yeah, it stands for acute disseminated encephalomyelitis. It's basically an autoimmune disorder that affects the brain and spinal cord.
Oh, wow. So the body's basically attacking itself.
Right. And they found that these edema-like lesions were present in about 7.69% of the kids in the study.
So not as common as the neurovascular stuff, but still a significant percentage.
Yeah, definitely. And then another big category they found was what they called an encephalitic pattern.
Okay, encephalitic pattern. What does that mean?
Basically, it means there are signs of inflammation in the brain. Encephalitis is the medical term for inflammation of the brain.
Got it. So is that like swelling in the brain?
Kind of. Yeah, there's definitely swelling involved.
Mm.
But it's more than just that. It's like a whole cascade of events that happen when the brain is inflamed.
So it's not just one specific thing. It's more of a general sign that there's something wrong.
Exactly. And it can cause a whole range of symptoms depending on which part of the brain is affected.
Oh, wow. So that's kind of scary. It can manifest in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, it's pretty complex. And they found that this encephalitic pattern was present in almost 14% of the kids in the study.
So that was one of the more common abnormalities they found.
Right. And then there were a few other categories as well. They found myelitis, which is inflammation of the spinal cord, in about 4.6% of the kids.
Oh, wow. So not just the brain, but the spinal cord, too.
Yeah. And then there was something called transient splenial lesions, which are temporary abnormalities in a specific part of the brain. These showed up in about 16% of the kids.
Okay, so lots of different ways COVID could be showing up in the brain.
Exactly. And it's important to note that these abnormalities were found even weeks or months after the initial COVID infection.
So even if kids seem to have recovered from the virus itself, there could still be lingering effects on their brains.
Right, and that's what makes this research so concerning. It's like we're just beginning to understand the full scope of COVID's impact on kids' neurological health.
So it's not just a short-term thing. It could have long-term consequences.
Exactly, and that's why we need to keep digging into this research and figure out how to best support kids who might be dealing with these neurological challenges.
And we also need to figure out how this compares to what we're seeing in adults, right?
Absolutely, I was just thinking that. Are kids more vulnerable to these neurological impacts than adults?
Well, that's a great question, and it's one that researchers are still trying to answer. There was one study that looked at brain scans of adults with COVID-19, and they found that about 42.6% of them also had abnormal results.
So pretty similar to the percentage in kids.
Right. So at first glance, it might seem like kids and adults are equally affected.
But I imagine there are some key differences.
Absolutely. The specific types of abnormalities that are seen can differ between children and adults.
That makes sense.
Uh,
Kids' brains are still developing, so they might be more susceptible to certain types of damage or disruption.
exactly. And there's still a lot more research that needs to be done to really understand these nuances.
So we've talked about the immediate impact, what shows up on those brain scans. But what about the long-term concerns?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? What are the lasting effects of these neurological abnormalities?
Right, and that's where that dissertation we mentioned comes in.
Right?
It focused specifically on attention and working memory.
Oh, right. Those are crucial for learning and pretty much everything we do in daily life.
Exactly. So I'm really curious to hear what they found.
Me too. So why don't we jump into that dissertation and see what it reveals about the potential long-term impacts of COVID-19 on kids' cognitive function.
Sounds like a plan. Let's do it.
So this dissertation we're looking at focused specifically on the impact of COVID-19 on attention and working memory in school-aged kids.
Yeah, and attention and working memory. Those are like the building blocks of learning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You need to be able to pay attention to learn new things, to follow instructions, even just to hold a conversation.
Right, and then working memory. That's like your brain's mental notepad. It lets you hold information in your mind while you're using it.
Yeah, exactly. Like when you're trying to remember a phone number or solve a math problem in your head, you need that working memory to keep everything straight.
Okay, so this dissertation, it suggests that COVID-19 could have a lasting impact on these crucial cognitive functions in children.
Right, and that's a big deal because if kids are having trouble paying attention and remembering things, it's going to affect their ability to learn and succeed in school and in life.
Now, the dissertation uses this phrase, exploratory analysis. What does that even mean?
Well, it means that this research is really on the cutting edge of understanding the long-term effects of COVID in kids. It's like they're pioneering this new area of research.
So it's groundbreaking, but it also means we need more research to confirm these findings.
Exactly. We need more data, more studies to really get a clear picture of what's going on.
So it's kind of like a first step, but it's a really important first step.
Absolutely. It's raising some really important questions, and it's highlighting the need for ongoing monitoring and support for kids who've had COVID.
Okay, so let's talk about that support. What can we do to help these kids who might be struggling?
Well, I think the first step is just creating an environment of understanding and support. We need to educate teachers, parents, caregivers about these potential long-term effects.
So no more, well, they'll catch up eventually.
Right. We need to be more proactive. We need to say, okay, this child might be facing some real challenges. How can we best support them right now?
And are there specific interventions or therapies that can help?
Yeah, there are actually some really promising ones. One example is cognitive remediation therapy. It focuses on improving specific cognitive skills, like attention, memory, problem solving, through targeted exercises and activities.
So it's like giving their brains a workout.
Kind of. It's about strengthening those cognitive muscles.
Interesting. I've also heard about mindfulness and meditation being helpful for focus and attention. Could those practices play a role here?
Absolutely. There's a growing body of research showing that mindfulness and meditation can have a positive impact on attention focus, even emotional regulation.
Which is so important for kids who are already dealing with these cognitive challenges.
Exactly. It can help them manage their stress and anxiety, which can further improve their cognitive function.
So it's like a holistic approach, addressing both the cognitive and emotional needs.
Right. It's about treating the whole child.
Okay, so we've got these interventions, these strategies, but I imagine it can still feel overwhelming for parents and educators who might not know where to start.
Yeah, I can see that. Are there any resources or organizations you can point them to?
It's a good question. Actually, there are some great resources out there. The CDC has a lot of information on their website about the neurological effects of COVID-19 in children.
Okay, the CDC, that makes sense. What about organizations specifically for families and educators?
Yeah, there are some good ones too, like the Child Neurology Foundation and the Learning Disabilities Association of America. They offer support and guidance for people who are navigating these challenges. So parents and teachers, they don't have to figure this out on their own. There's help available.
Right. And I'd also recommend reaching out to their local healthcare providers. Many hospitals and clinics have specialized programs for children with cognitive challenges.
Okay, so there's the CDC, there are organizations, and there are local healthcare providers. Lots of options for support.
Exactly. It's about finding what works best for each individual child and family.
So we've talked about the challenges, but we've also talked about the hope. There are things we can do to help these kids thrive.
Absolutely. It's not a hopeless situation. We just need to be aware of the potential risks and be proactive about providing support.
And speaking of hope, I wanted to ask you about neuroplasticity. The brain's ability to adapt and rewire itself.
Yeah, neuroplasticity is incredible. It's like the brain's superpower,
Yeah.
and it gives us a lot of reason to be optimistic.
So even though COVID might cause some disruptions in the brain, kids' brains still have this amazing ability to recover and compensate.
Exactly. Especially if we provide the right support. We can help guide that neuroplasticity in a positive direction.
So it's like we're giving their brains a helping hand to find new pathways and connections.
Precisely. And that's why early intervention is so important. The younger the brain, the more plastic it is, the more potential it has for change and adaptation.
So the earlier we intervene, the better the chances of a good outcome.
Right. We want to give those young brains the best possible chance to heal and grow.
This makes me think about the importance of creating an environment that supports neuroplasticity. Are there certain things parents and educators can do to foster that process?
Oh, absolutely. We want to create enriched environments for kids. Environments that are filled with stimulating activities, social interaction, emotional support. All of these things can help promote neuroplasticity and enhance brain function.
So things like play music, art, spending time in nature, those can all play a role.
Exactly. Those activities give the brain the stimulation it needs to grow and adapt.
It's about creating that holistic approach we talked about earlier.
Right. It's about nurturing the whole child.
This has been such an insightful conversation. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. It's clear that this is a really complex issue, and there's still a lot we don't know.
It's true. We're still in the early stages of understanding the full scope of COVID-19's impact on the brain. But the research is advancing rapidly, and we're gaining valuable insights every day.
And I think what's important for our listeners to take away from this is that while there are challenges, there's also hope. We've learned about the brain's incredible capacity for resilience and the power of early intervention and support.
Right. It's about empowering parents, educators, healthcare providers with the knowledge and tools they need to advocate for children and help them navigate these challenges. And ultimately, it's about creating a future where all children have the opportunity to reach their full potential.
Now, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the potential differences in neurological impact between children and adults. Why might children be more vulnerable to certain types of effects from COVID-19?
Well, that's a question researchers are still exploring, but one theory is that the developing brain with its rapid growth and changes might be more susceptible to disruptions caused by inflammation or immune responses triggered by the virus.
So it's almost like the virus is hitting the brain during a critical period of development when it's most vulnerable.
Exactly. And those disruptions could have a cascading effect on cognitive development.
I'm also wondering about the potential role of genetics. Could certain genetic predispositions make some children more vulnerable to neurological complications from COVID-19?
That's definitely a possibility. We know that genetics plays a role in many neurological conditions, so it's reasonable to think that it might also influence susceptibility to COVID-19's neurological effects.
This all points to the need for personalized approaches to care, recognizing that each child's experience with COVID-19 and its neurological impact can be unique.
I completely agree. A one-size-fits-all approach won't work here. We need to tailor interventions and support to each child's individual needs and circumstances, taking into account their developmental stage, medical history, and any other relevant factors.
And that brings us back to the importance of ongoing monitoring and assessment. We need to stay attuned to the evolving needs of children who have had COVID-19 and be prepared to adjust our approach as needed.
Couldn't agree more. Proactive monitoring is key to identifying and addressing any challenges that may arise and ensuring that children receive the support they need to thrive.
This has been an incredibly insightful conversation. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into COVID-19's neurological impact on children, from exploring the latest research findings to discussing strategies for support and intervention. It's clear that this is a complex and evolving issue, and there's still much we don't know.
It's true that we're still in the early stages of understanding the full scope of COVID-19's impact on the brain, but the research is advancing rapidly and we're gaining valuable insights every day.
And I think what's important for our listeners to take away from this is that while there are challenges, there's also hope. We've learned about the brain's incredible capacity for resilience and the power of early intervention and support.
Right, it's about empowering parents, educators, and healthcare providers with the knowledge and tools they need to advocate for children and help them navigate these challenges. And ultimately, it's about creating a future where all children have the opportunity to reach their full potential.
It's really mind-boggling when you think about it all.
Yeah.
We've been talking about these potential long-term effects on kids' brains. And I can't help but wonder about the bigger picture, like how this might impact society as a whole.
Yeah, that's a really important point to consider. We could be looking at a generation of children who face unique challenges in terms of learning attention, cognitive function.
It's like we need to start thinking about COVID-19's impact, not just on individuals, but on entire systems. Education and healthcare, even the workforce down the line.
Exactly. If a significant number of children are experiencing these cognitive challenges, it could put a strain on our resources. We might see increased demand for special ed programs, therapies, support services.
And then as these kids grow up and enter the workforce, we might need to rethink how we accommodate and support them in the workplace.
Right? It's like this ripple effect that extends far beyond the individual level.
It makes you realize how interconnected everything really is. This pandemic started as a health crisis, but it's having these far-reaching consequences that we're only beginning to understand.
Absolutely. It's really highlighted the complex interplay between physical health, mental health, societal well-being.
It makes me wonder, knowing what we're learning about COVID-19's potential neurological impact, how should this change the way we approach childhood development in general?
That's a great question. And I think it calls for a more holistic approach to childhood development. We can't just focus on physical health and vaccinations anymore.
Right, we need to prioritize neurological and cognitive well-being as well.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that a child's brain is just as important as their body, and we need to provide the necessary support to nurture both.
So early detection and intervention become even more crucial, right?
Absolutely. The earlier we can identify and address any cognitive challenges, the better the chances of minimizing their long-term impact.
Takes a village, right?
Exactly. Parents, educators, healthcare providers, policymakers, we all need to work together to create a system that supports children's neurological well-being.
Well, this has been an incredibly eye-opening conversation. I feel like we've only scratched the surface of understanding COVID-19's impact on children's brains, but we've learned so much about the potential risks and the steps we can take to mitigate them.
I agree. There's still so much we don't know, but the research is moving forward and we're getting valuable insights all the time.
And I think the key takeaway for our listeners is that while there are challenges, there's also hope. We've seen the brain's incredible capacity for resilience and the power of early intervention and support.
Absolutely. It's about empowering ourselves with knowledge and taking action to support the children in our lives.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. We've talked about the challenges, but I think it's important to remember that even in the face of adversity, there's always hope. We've learned so much from this pandemic, both about the virus itself and about our own resilience as a society. So how can we use what we're learning to build a more resilient and supportive future for all children?
That's a powerful question. And I think the answer lies in our collective action. It's about prioritizing children's well-being, investing in research and support systems, and working together to create a world where every child has the opportunity to thrive.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. And remember, we're all in this together. By working together and supporting each other, we can help all children reach their full potential.
It's been a pleasure. And remember, there's always hope. Keep learning, keep advocating, keep fighting for the well-being of our children.